Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'm just giving everybody a chance to make sure they're on and they've clicked the link. And welcome to the inaugural Sourcebooks BookLight event. My name is Mary Weber O'Malley, and I am honored to be your host for this evening. I'm a virtual bookseller for Skylark Bookshop. I'm also co-host of Blaze Boudoir on A Mighty Blaze. And you can find me talking books on Instagram and Facebook at Blurb Your Enthusiasm. I live with my husband in a menagerie of pets outside Chicago, Illinois. Tonight, we have a fantastic panel of authors to honor Women's History Month. Before we get started with tonight's event, I do want to remind all of you that you will receive a signed book plate when you purchase any of the author's books from any of the participating stores which are listed on Eventbrite. We hope you'll support our indies by making your purchases from one of those stores. And as we move through our program, please put any questions you have for the authors into the chat, and we will get to those questions at the end of the event. I am thrilled to introduce our four very talented authors. After I introduce each of them, they will give you a 1-minute pitch of their book. We're going to start with Marie Benedict. Marie is a graduate of Boston College with a focus in history and art history and the Boston University School of Law. Marie, author of The Other Einstein, Carnegie's Maid, The Only Woman in the Room, Lady Clementine, and The Mystery of Miss Christie, views herself as an archaeologist telling the untold stories of women. She is a lawyer in Pittsburgh where she lives with her family. Marie, can you tell us about your book?
It would be my pleasure. But first of all, I just want to say thank you for coming out tonight to talk with us and chat with us. It's so fun to be able to celebrate Women's History Month with these fabulous authors. And it's a real treat to be here with you too, Mary. So Her Hidden Genius is the story of the brilliant British scientist, Rosalind Franklin. She used a very difficult and meticulous technique to discover the double helix structure of DNA. But little did she know, without her knowledge or permission, one of her colleagues, Morris Wilkins, utilized her very hard-won data and images and shared it with two gentlemen who are better known from Cambridge University, James Watson and Francis Crick, who very quickly took her information, built a model, and wrote a paper for which they won the Nobel Prize, but Rosalind did not. It is a story that is very timely for today in terms of the marginalization of women in the sciences, but it's also a story of tenacity and hope. Rosalind went on in the years after the DNA discovery to do work on RNA and viruses, which actually is foundational for our understanding of COVID and the creation of vaccines. So it's really the story of just an incredible scientific heroine.
Thank you so much, Marie. And Kate Moore is the award-winning New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of The Radium Girls, a British writer based in London. She has published numerous Sunday Times bestsellers, writing across various genres, including history, biography, true crime, gift, and humor. She has written more than 15 books, and her work has been translated into over 12 languages. Kate, could you tell us about your book?
I would love to. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Greetings from the UK. Let's hope the internet holds up across the Atlantic. So, The Woman They Could Not Silence. She is Elizabeth Packard, a housewife from 1860s America, whose true story starts with a simple question. What would happen if your husband could commit you to an insane asylum just because you disagreed with him? In Elizabeth's case, the answer is surprisingly inspirational. Her story has everything. It's got courtroom drama, a twist of Gothic horror as we step inside the insane asylums of the 19th century. It's got shocking science history. But above all else, this is the compelling story of a woman finding not only herself, but her unsilenceable voice as she uses it to fight against an enraging injustice that still resonates today. Because make no mistake, though this is a history book, the issues at its heart could not be more modern. And through Elizabeth's words and her shining example, we can all learn to become people who cannot be silenced.
Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you.
Heather Webb. Heather is the USA Today best-selling and award-winning author of 7 historical novels. Her novels have been Goodreads top picks, honored by the Women's Fiction Writers Association Star Award, finalist for the 2020 Goldsboro RNA Award in the UK, and more. To date, Heather's books have been translated to over a dozen languages. She lives in New England with her family and one feisty rabbit. Heather, please tell us about your book.
Yes, all right, The Next Ship Home. It is a novel of Ellis Island, and I was drawn into this story because I'm fascinated by legend. And I think that this very, very legendary and infamous building in American history has mostly kind of flown under the radar. So I started my story in 1902. I started digging into all the research out there, looking into the New York Times archives, and I found that, in fact, a whole lot was going on that we did not know. Corruption rippling through the corridors of this immigration station. And so I have 2 characters, one who's an immigrant that comes from Sicily and one who is a first-generation American. Her parents are German immigrants that run a beer house in the tenement neighborhood in Lower East Side, who become fast friends and confront this very corrupt system. You will uncover a whole lot of dark secrets that most people do not know. So.
Fascinating, absolutely. And Catherine Gregorio. Catherine is the great niece of Catherine Clark. She holds a BA in history from Dartmouth College, an MSc in international relations from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and an MBA from the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. She currently works in product marketing for Adobe. Catherine, please tell us about this book.
Thanks, Mary. And it's really exciting to be with all of you today because today is my publication day. So it's a wonderful way to celebrate with all of you. The Double Life of Catherine Clark tells the true story of my trailblazing great aunt, Catherine Clark, who had many firsts. She was the first woman to report out of Allied occupied Berlin, and she was also the first woman wire reporter behind the Iron Curtain. Catherine was positioned to see something that none of her male colleagues did in Belgrade on assignment. And she saw something in a man who on paper should have been her enemy. And she pursued a story that turned into a friendship that would go on to change her and history because of her dedication to making sure that his stories and ideas made their way to the West. The Double Life of Catherine Clark asks the question, what would you risk for a friend? While it also explores the principles of democracy and communism and tells the story of a very inspiring woman who risked her life to bring truth and justice to the world.
Absolutely amazing. Every one of these books is just incredible, incredible. Thank you all for telling us a little about it. Now we come to the fun part of the evening. We're going to have a round robin kind of dinner party scenario of sorts. The authors will be coming and going with 2 of them chatting with each other at a time. We're going to start with Kate Moore talking with Marie Benedict.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mary. Hi, Marie.
It's so nice to see you.
It always is. Marie and I go way back, so it's always a pleasure when we're hopping on Zoom calls.
In person many times, which seems like such a thing of the past and such a delight.
It is. So I have a question to kick off. You've written about many different time periods in your fabulous array of books. But if you had to pick one time period to live in yourself, which would it be and why?
Oh my gosh, you really are going to trip me up with this one. Okay, so I have followed a lot of ladies, a lot of places. Lots in London. You can tell I have a special love for your homeland. Eastern Europe, America. But if I had to pick a time period, I don't know that I would pick a time period that I've written about so far. If I could go into the past, I might go even further back than I've written before. I have this long-standing fascination with ancient Egypt and ancient Ireland. I might, and I've written a little bit about ancient Ireland in some older books, but I might go back there. Now, if I had to pick a time period of the that I have explored, I think that the time period in between World War I and World War II is really fascinating. The sort of 20s, 30s lead up into World War II is a time period I've explored in a variety of books, and very tangentially in Her Hidden Genius, because we kind of harken back to it in Rosalind's own history. But I've covered it in The Mystery of Mrs. Christie, in Lady Clementine, and actually the book that I have coming out next January, The Midford Affair, also kind of taps into that time period. And there's so many parallels between that time period and our own, that I find it really a sort of fascinating ground to kind of dig and root around in. So I probably pick that of the places that I've actually visited in my books.
That's great. My next question to you is, you've obviously written about some incredible women from history, because all your books are sort of, based on these real characters who did incredible things, and you do such a wonderful deep dive into their lives so that you can bring these historical figures to life through your fiction. And I wondered, through all the people you've written about, incredible trailblazing scientists and best-selling novelists, in learning about their lives, these women's lives and how they live and the battles that they've overcome and the way they work and so on, is there anything that you learned about them that you've taken into your own life, or that you have learned about that you think everyone on this call, might benefit from learning about to inspire their own lives and make changes in their own lives?
What a great question. I mean, and you've done this yourself in your own books, most recently with The Women They Could Not Silence. I mean, I love what you did there, and this sort of very modern sort of resonance of her words. I would have to say, I mean, there's definitely threads that go through all of my books, and the qualities that each of my women have, because each of them wanted to do something and be something which was sort of outside the prescribed typical role for women of their time period, whatever that looked like, whether it's the 1850s or the 1950s, right? In each of those cases, they had hurdles to overcome. Each of those women was brilliant. They were tenacious, because, over and over again, the hurdles would represent themselves. And they had to be resilient, because there were so many times that those hurdles didn't quite work. They fell down and they had to pick themselves up again and reposition. And I do think that each of those qualities is one that that women today, and certainly I myself, really try to emulate. But if I had to say the one quality that maybe is a little bit unique, and that comes from Rosalind Franklin. We often, when we think about Rosalind, we think about, if you know her at all, you're familiar with sort of the way she was marginalized in the DNA discovery. But what she did afterwards, which was like a little bit of the tenacity and resilience, but really unique, was to lift herself up and say, I have a duty here. I have a duty to mankind. I have science. I have to do science for science sake, and I have to leave that behind for humanity. I'm not going to sort of wallow in what happened with DNA. I'm going to move forward into this new area of RNA and virus research, the sort of microstructure. And I'm going to give everything I have to that. And that, I think, that sort of ability to rise up from sort of the ashes and really claim that next stage in her life, I think that has been really inspirational for me personally.
It's inspirational hearing about it, to be honest, Mary.
I mean, and what's interesting too, and this isn't one of your questions, but I've become friendly with her namesake niece, Rosalind Franklin. And that's the quality that she treasures. Of all the things she knows about her her, her aunt. It's that quality, and that has made it resonate sort of even further with me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think we're only allotted 2 questions. I could talk to you all night, but
Me too. Thank you. Great
Thank
question.
you.
Oh, now we have to go off and 2 other people come on,
That's right.
I think.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Heather's on. Yeah.
I'm on. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Heather.
I had the extraordinary pleasure of reading this book. First of all, when I started, I had to keep looking up, this is really nonfiction, right? Because I just kept thinking it moves like fiction. It's spicy and fast paced and gripping, and I love narrative nonfiction, and you have written it so beautifully. So I have to start by saying that.
Thank you.
So, and the other thing is, I live near Hartford, and there were Radium Girls in Hartford. I have to throw that out. There were the factories there, and I don't know if you spent any time in New England, but when you were doing that.
Not really, no, unfortunately. I have gone on tour and have met some of the people that were associated with the case, but it wasn't part of my research trip, unfortunately, because I had to focus on New Jersey and Illinois.
So many, sure, yeah.
But
anyway, I saw that and went, oh my God, I there was some that was local to me.
Yeah.
So I'm fangirling a little bit here. So I read your bio and I'm so impressed. You've been a nonfiction editor, you've been an actress, and a nonfiction writer, and you've written in many categories too. I saw children's books.
Yeah.
How can you talk a tiny bit about your, like, where you've landed? Do you feel like you're in this place you want to be now, writing, historical nonfiction, or?
Well, I'm loving it. I to be honest, Heather, I just wake up every day and have to pinch myself that this is what I do, that I'm an author, and I get to write books for a living. I'm sure all of us on the call just feel so blessed and lucky to do what we dreamed of doing. When I was a little girl, I dreamed of being a writer. So I just have to pinch myself that's what I do. I'm loving doing what I do right now. I would say always, I don't think you should sort of really limit yourself to one particular genre or one particular style. I think people are always evolving through life in terms of interest, what happens to you, what you might be interested in. And I think in my career to date, what I've actually loved is the variety that I've had, so that I've done ghostwriting and I've written true crime thrillers, and then the next moment might be working on a sort of humorous, heartwarming story about, a real cat that lives in a station in the north of England. And I love that variety, and the fact that I have to write in different styles, so one minute I can be cracking jokes and the next I'm writing a really dark, tragic, true life story. So I would say I'm loving what I'm doing right now, but I would never say this is what I'm going to do forever, because I would hope that my writing will evolve and that I'll get to tell different stories in different ways as life continues down its journey. If I'm lucky, if I continue to be lucky.
Lots of challenges coming your way all the time. I love it. I like an adventurous person. I consider myself adventurous. So I immediately connected to that in your bio. That was really lovely to see. Can I talk a tiny bit about your book? So
please do. Thank you. And thank you. I have to say, coming from a novelist, your lovely words at the start of this conversation just mean so much to me, because I aspire to write my nonfiction like a novel, but coming from you, that just means the world. So thank you.
I'm so glad. I mean, honestly, I had to, when I was reading it, I kept stopping and looking up and going, this is really nonfiction. I flipped to the back. Well, there's the bibliography. Here's the stuff it says. I went back to the prologue, or before the prologue, the letter that you wrote about this is nonfiction. And I just went, wow, very gripping. So in your research for Elizabeth Packard, did you come across other women, sort of known women in history that fell under the same sort of conditions as her? And I, in my mind, I'm thinking about Nellie Bly, because I recently, last year, with my co-author, wrote a sort of loosely inspired by Nellie Bly. And she spent time in the asylum in New York. And did you find that there were a fair number of stories about other women that sort of were in the same situation?
I mean,
that made history?
I think the thing that really struck me about this theme, and it was a book that I found my theme first before I found Elizabeth and her particular personal story, which I've always seen as a sort of microcosm for what I'm, the theme that I was writing about. So yes, there are countless women to whom this has happened. There are obviously differences. So Nellie Bly, whom you mentioned, for people who don't know, she was a journalist who got herself committed, deliberately committed to a madhouse, and then, actually really had to battle to get out again, even though she was perfectly sane. And then, wrote about her experiences. She obviously chose to submit to that experience so that she could write about it. In Elizabeth's case, this was a completely unwilling commitment. But I think my point about writing this story is that this silencing of women through the claim that we're crazy, which could just be a throwaway comment in a work meeting, or it could be your husband institutionalizing you, for speaking up against him, which, to be honest, I've had emails from readers, from recent times saying this has happened to me too. For me, it was that resonance to the modern day that was really compelling for me. So yes, I did find other people from history to whom that had happened on different scales. The book actually concludes with a more modern day postscript, which is about, modern day politics in America and the attempted silencing and dismissing of public political figures because of their gender. But it also touches on the suffragettes who, were deemed hysteric. It touches on the civil rights activists in 1960s America who were diagnosed with schizophrenia. This book is about power and the silencing of people through psychiatric oppression, basically. So yes, there were countless other people that I uncovered in my research to whom this had also happened.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely to chat.
Lovely to chat.
I think we're getting the hook.
Side, everyone.
Yes.
Well, Heather, I have the pleasure of asking you two questions. And I must say, what I loved about your book was the story, as well as learning about an untold piece of history. And one of the things that you talk about is a lot of your characters were based on real people. A lot of events were based on real events. And so I'm curious, as you were doing your research, talking to experts, what was the most surprising thing that you uncovered?
The most surprising. I guess in general, I was surprised that so much corruption was happening at Ellis Island. So a very quick sort of backdrop is that there was an immigration station at the rim of Manhattan Bay at Castle Garden for many decades. And there was so much corruption happening there that the government finally decided to move the immigration center out to Ellis Island so that they could keep the New Yorkers who were taking advantage of these newly arrived immigrants away from each other. They could keep them away and sort of protect them. But as it turns out, the companies that were servicing Ellis Island also did the same thing. And as did the inspectors who were working there, some of the matrons, some of the nurses. Now, many of them were good people, but there were those just enough that the journalists on the Ellis Island beat caught wind of all of the things happening out there. And it trickled down to Theodore Roosevelt, who then said, this cannot be. This, we're going to have to clean house, essentially. And he appointed a new commissioner to take over and to weed out these individuals. And the starting point of my story was actually the most shocking to me, because as an American who thinks about the US as this wonderful place to live, and it is, and we have so much, it was very shocking to me. And as a military brat, to think about, we protect people and they come in and there's a beacon of hope. Oh, wait, there's all these things happening. And it was even then 100 years ago. And that was actually the most shocking thing, I think, for me. And I knew I had to tell that story. Absolutely.
And I'm so glad you did. It was really, I think, one of the things that I took away, and you mentioned corruption, but you touch on a couple of dark topics, but I walked away feeling so inspired by Francesca and her relationship with Alma. And I always just love to understand how different writers write. Did you know what your ending was going to be from the beginning, or did it come to you as you were writing the story?
So I did. So once I start, I do the research and then I do a synopsis, and I tend to have a good idea of what the ending is. That doesn't mean I know how I'm going to get there. I have a general idea. I know how it's going to start. I know how it's going to end. The middle for me is always a challenge. So I ended up losing my way about 2/3 of the way through the book. And I was so fascinated by other events that were happening in New York at the same time. There was a ferry that caught fire and over 1,000 people died on a way to a church picnic, and they were all German Americans. I got sort of sucked into that. And then there was this huge anarchist riot on a ferry of Italian immigrants, followed by all these other riots. And, I have a bit of our anarchism that's sort of one of the threads through the book. And so I got, waylaid by this, and my ending stayed the same, but that sort of climactic point, that whole last third before the ending, ended up changing. I had to cut about 30,000 words, which,
Wow.
what is that? That's over 100 pages, 125 pages or something. Yeah. And rewrite the whole end when I realized that stuff has nothing to do with Ellis Island. I know it's fascinating, but I think as people who love learning about historical events and relaying all that information, it's very easy to get lost sometimes in the details. So yeah, I ended up cutting all that out and recalibrating, but the ending always stayed the same. So
I hope you write a sequel.
oh, thank you. Thanks so much. I think that means I'm done, right? So it's you and goodbye.
Bye. Hi.
Hi. And you, Katherine, you like to go by Katie, right? Or do you want to go by Katherine? Okay.
Either one. Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm flexible on names too from earlier today. Well, first of all, I have to say, happy book birthday. I mean, this is so exciting. This book it's just out in the world today, right? It is such a beautiful labor of love, I'm assuming. This sort of, I have to echo something that Kate said earlier. It's narrative nonfiction, but it is a page turner. I mean, the way you wove in the history with the facts and the suspense, the story of your great aunt and what she was able to accomplish both in World War II and then more specifically during these Cold War years it's just fascinating. And I mean, and like Heather, I was like, I know I wasn't researching her specifically, but I was researching, as I was reading it, I was researching world events. And I mean, the way you not only entered into her world and captured the day-to-day, and yet made it a page turner in terms of larger world events was really amazing. It's really a must-read book. It's really fantastic. Now, I know you kind of gave us a summary earlier about it, but one of the questions I get asked a lot, and one of the questions I'm always most curious about, is how a writer came to choose and find and land upon a particular story. And I think this book has an incredible personal origin. And I love that about it. I mean, that makes it all the more powerful and meaningful to me as a reader. So would you mind telling our listeners how you discovered, I'll put that in quotes because there probably was less of a discovery, but how you discovered Katherine Clark and what compelled you to tell her story? Because I think it's a wonderful story unto itself.
Thank you. Thank you. So I grew up hearing vague stories about many members of my family, and I always paid attention to the ones about Katherine because we share the same name. And there was always this story that was kind of fuzzy about her smuggling out papers in her bra. And I didn't really think anything of it. And at the time, I was eight or nine. I never dreamed I would grow up to write a book that really kind of expands on that story. I was at home doing research in Georgetown University's library for my master's and ran into a friend that distracted me to see a plaque on a wall that had a special collection. And I went digging, and it turns out that my great aunt and uncle, who were not allowed to graduate from college during their time because they got married, and back then you weren't allowed to be married and to be a university student. My great uncle I know it was only 100 years ago too, like not even. And my great uncle decided to go back to finish his degree when he was 78. and fortunately left 4 huge boxes of amazing primary documents. We're talking correspondence and cables back to editors, as well as drafts and notes from interviews. And, actually at the time I was in graduate school, I didn't think I had enough time to really do much with it. Fast forward 10 years, I have my first child. I'm home visiting my parents in DC, and the idea had kind of been in my head. And I just decided to go take pictures of every single piece of material. And over the next 10 years, made my way through it, supplemented it with a lot of their news coverage, quite frankly, both from her coverage, and then my great uncle wrote for Time, as well as their contemporaries. And then the communist dissident that she was friends with wrote 18 books in his lifetime, very prolific, ranged from theory to stories about his childhood. And I just couldn't get the idea out of my head, and worked through different ways to tell it, and landed on the one that you have right before you.
And this is a corollary. So I know we're only supposed to ask 2 questions. So this is really just part of my first question. I just want everyone to know that. Was there a moment that kind of spurred you on to write this particular story? Was it a world event or a personal event, or is it just something that kind of stayed with you over time, and it finally kind of all coalesced?
I just couldn't get her story out of my head. She essentially wrote herself out of history. She never benefited from her relationship with this man. And I just started thinking about it. And I love history. I love stories and the personal connection. It just kind of, I think, marinated in my brain. And then while I had a newborn, I just kept thinking about it more. Maybe it was the lack of sleep.
Yeah.
I just decided to go for it.
Oh, that's incredible. Well, I absolutely love that about this. And I think it makes you two Catherines make the whole story really come alive. If you had to, well, there's 2, this is sort of a 2-part story. As you can see, I have so many questions. I'm really kind of cheating on my 2 question limit. This is like a 2-parter. And this is in part, I mean, this story, especially in terms of the way in which your aunt brought to the West and to our country and democracy in general, these stories and this information that was really closed off. These were communist bloc countries. This was really the height of the Cold War. It's so powerful. And yet, as I was reading it, of course, the modern day resonance of it really struck me with everything happening between Russia and the Ukraine right now. If you had to describe your great aunt's unique legacy, how would you do that? And as a corollary, again, I realize this is a little bit of a cheat, but woven in that legacy, I'm suspicious that there's sort of a corollary examination of her gender, and the way in which her gender really throughout the book operated as both a blessing and a curse. So I'm really kind of interested both in her legacy overall and the way in which her gender really kind of wove in and out of that.
So it's really fascinating. My great uncle considered himself as somebody who just presented the facts, and my great aunt wanted to tell a story about them. And I think very much that embodies gender. I also think, given the fact that she had to work 10 times, 100 times harder to get a story than her husband or any of her male counterparts, it allowed her to really see the world in a different way. And she had to fight for it. And she ended up uncovering the story really of a lifetime as a result, and then uniquely persisted and continued to almost become a one-woman champion of this man and his ideas, and fundamentally changed her outlook on how she saw the world. I mean, she always reported what she saw as she saw it, but it was as she saw it, not just the facts. And I think her legacy today is really seen in the different journalism styles. And I certainly resonate more towards the human stories. It helps bring it to a more tangible relationship with me as a consumer. I don't know if that's because I'm a female or not, but those are the stories that really grip me versus more of the abstract facts. And you can see it even actually in the research that I did looking at the peers, they're predominantly men. It was very fact-based versus how she told the stories. There was this one, just to give you a perfect, just one specific example. There was this one story that she told when she was in Hungary during the revolution, and she likened the Soviet Union to aliens from Mars. And we ended up not including it in the book at all because it was a little out there, but
Yeah.
she wrote that in the 1950s. And it was
Wow.
a way for her to kind of explain to readers back home some of the emotion and differences that she was experiencing on the streets of Budapest.
Well, you absolutely bring that, not just her legacy, but her very human experience to the forefront through the pages of this book. And certainly at different points, and then I know we have to go, but at certain points, the issues of how much harder she had to work to get these stories out, and yet how uniquely situated she was to tell them was so frustrating, but such an important part of who she was and the time period in the story. So thank you so much. It's a terrific book.
Thank you.
Holy cow. Is everybody loving this format? Because I absolutely could have listened to you guys just, pair off all night long. The questions were amazing. I feel like I'm looking at the books a little differently. It was absolutely wonderful. And for all of you watching, I see a few questions popping into the Q&A, but if you have questions for the authors, please put them into the Q&A and we'll get to those very quickly here. I do just want to say that isn't it perfect that we're kicking off this BookLight event with source books during Women's History Month. And source books, for those of you watching, when I get a book from source books sent to me, I don't even have to see what it's about to know I'm going to want to read it, because source books is the largest woman-owned publisher in North America. It is woman-driven. The authors, everyone, and I heard this some time ago, that source books publishes authors, not books. And I see that time and time again. And I see that with all of you and all of your books. This has just been so fabulous. So we have our first question here, and it's from Kimberly. Which woman, past or present, do you admire most? And I'm going to say that whoever wants to take that can take it.
I'll leap in. There you go. So anyone who's read The Radium Girls, which was my previous history book, may know, or if you've ever heard me talk about The Radium Girls before, you will know what a passion project it was for me. So my answer is a woman called Katherine Donohue, who is one of the Radium Girls, and she is a totally ordinary, extraordinary person. So the story of the Radium Girls is that these women from the First World War and Roaring Twenties are poisoned by the radium paint they work with. They're told it's safe by their employers, and they have to fight against the received medical wisdom of the age, against corrupt corporations who are trying to silence them and essentially, do everything in their power to make sure that this story doesn't get out. And Katherine Donohue she gives everything to this fight for justice. She literally gives evidence against the companies on her deathbed. It's a completely altruistic, valiant fight for justice from a woman who is using her last breath to speak out against this injustice. So she, for me, is a shining example of doing the right thing. When you feel that you're at your most powerless, which the Radium Girls often did, know that you are always powerful. And that's what Katherine Donohue embodies for me.
Fantastic.
Oh my gosh, that's
Absolutely.
so powerful. And she was such a powerful person, Kate.
She's incredible. Yeah. Her story still breaks my heart and lifts my spirit every day.
Yeah. Really.
Anybody else have one that just jumps to mind?
I mean, I'd probably do Rosalind Franklin. I mean, I've written about a lot of really incredible, powerful, inspiring women, but her, I talked about her tenacity, her ability to rise up, you know, she made the ultimate sacrifice for her discoveries. You know, we don't know for sure, but we do think that there was, you know, sort of an epigenetic piece to the cancer that killed her at a very, very young age. And the work that she did with X-ray crystallography, subjecting herself to those X-rays over and over again to get, you know, the most famous image in all of science, photograph 51, and her discoveries in DNA, which have they're groundbreaking. I mean, they've completely changed genetics for all of us, and beyond. You know, her work with RNA and viruses, I would have to say her. I mean, her ability to do what she did, put herself on the line, and then even when society wanted to do everything they could to stop her from doing her science the way it should be done, she just rose up, picked herself up, and found another place to do it. And we are all beholden to her as a result of that. So I would probably have to say her.
That's incredible. Absolutely.
You know, I have to say, and I'm maybe the dark horse. There are so many women, obviously, that are heroic and fascinating and have changed the world for all of us, that it's impossible for me to choose one. But I have to say that in terms of women I like to read about, women I like to write about, I really like a complex, nuanced character that isn't all black and white.
Mm-hmm.
I like a woman that is she's paradoxical. For everything wonderful about her, perhaps there's a side to her that's a hell of a lot less wonderful. That's dodgy, even, I think, maybe as the English would say, because I think that we all are paradoxical, and I think that makes them all the more heroic in some ways. These people who strive for betterment and justice and art and our rights to vote and all these things, but they also have, you know, this side to them that is that they must overcome, that they struggle against all the time. And this is why I wrote Rodin's Lover, for example, with Camille Claudel, who ended up in an asylum herself, who was a brilliant artist, and she had schizophrenia, and she was a difficult character to write. But I don't think of her as any less heroic, because she created these incredibly beautiful things, and she fought the male-dominated art system, art world, and her works last today. And she now has a museum in Paris dedicated to her, open in 2017. So I think for me, I can't put a name on it, but I would say I like a dark horse.
I do too. Absolutely. We have a question here from Donna, furthering the inspiration conversation. What book have you read recently that inspired or impressed you? Of course, each other's books is the obvious answer, but
Obvious.
I know I have read so many incredible books over the past months about, you know, strong women and dark horses. I love a flawed character. So is there a book that each of you have read recently that has really inspired you?
I can jump in. I did something for the first time recently where I read several books on the same topic, almost by accident. And I read The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks right after I read The Empire of Pain. And it was similar themes to the medical establishment, completely different stories. And I really liked the juxtaposition of what I learned from both of those books. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks is the untold story of a woman who basically her cells were the HeLa cells that were pioneers in some of the research that is ongoing today. And then The Empire of Pain tells the story of the Sackler family and the opioid epidemic. And it just was really interesting to read both of those together, and I enjoyed it.
Somebody just said they call those book flights.
I love it.
I do too. Anybody else have a book that they've read recently?
I'll jump in. I actually, as part of some like broad-based research that I was doing, and I don't normally read biographies and autobiographies, but I read the autobiography of Eleanor Roosevelt at the same time I wrote didn't write, I mean, come on. I read the biography of, oh my gosh, my brain, Ada Lovelace, sorry. And those two, I mean, the two totally, again, like maybe this is a book flight, I don't know, but two totally different historic women. And yet what they, again, it kind of goes back to that theme that I'm fascinated with about how people from different circumstances, women from different backgrounds, different places in their life, different passions, but how they're able to, the ways in which they rise up to do the things that they're meant to do. And, you know, Eleanor Roosevelt is obviously very, very different than Ada Lovelace, who was considered like the first computer. She was a mathematician in like, I think it was the 1700s or early 1800s. But both of these women did so many things behind the scenes, which we really don't realize that they were involved in or that they were capable of. And so those two to me were, you know, kind of off the beaten track, not mainstream books, but aside from that, obviously everyone here. So there you go.
All right, here's one. What led you, each of you, to be a writer of strong women? And kind of a combination question, was there a book you read as a child that really kind of spurred you on to write women's stories?
The entire Harlequin romance catalog. I loved Harlequin romances. I had giant stacks of them. Did you? I also read the classics because my parents had them left over from their college classes on the bookshelves. So I had this weird juxtaposition of classic literature and giant stacks of Harlequin romance. But I don't know that that really answers your question. I guess I wrote strong women because I think of myself as one, and I'm attracted to other strong women. I'm attracted to women that strike out and try things that are hard. I think that historical fiction has really gone that way in general as a genre. I think it's, you know, this is what people are wanting to read. We want to be inspired by these people. So it was a natural fit for me.
Anybody else want to jump in on that one?
I talk about this a lot, so pardon if it's like old ground, but for me, I mean, like Heather, there's so I'm inspired by so many women, and I hope to be inspiring myself in some ways. So I'm drawn to that. But for me, it's writing these books, writing these stories actually started when I was in middle school. When I read Marion Zimmer Bradley's, that's right? The Mists of Avalon.
Yes.
So good, right? I mean, so good. Stands the test of time. For people who don't know it, it is the it's a retelling of the Arthurian legends. It's a retelling of you know, King Arthur and those freaking swashbuckling knights of the Round Table, but instead of them, it's Morgan Le Fay and Guinevere. And when I read that book in, I think it was middle school, I'm not really sure, but it was around then, it was really groundbreaking for the time. And we do that now. People want to read those stories now, those retellings, but it was the first time I'd ever come across something like that. And suddenly the same events told by the women were totally different. And they were so inspiring. And that it was a very circuitous path. Took me a long time to get where I am now. But if I look back on the course of my life, it was that book that put me on this particular path.
Wow. That's an amazing story. I love it. So we have, this is a combination question from a couple of different viewers. Writing about the women you do, what is the most important thing you would like readers to take away from your books about these women's stories? So question for each of you.
I can start.
I think, okay. Yeah, you go, Katie.
I think at the simplest level, I would think about my book as an example of one person being able to change the world. And that inspires me, especially in the world that we're in today. I think it's really relevant, and just that one individual can make a difference.
Love that.
Yeah, I hope people reading my books, I think because I write about women who have, you know, generally have been completely forgotten by history, even though they did incredible things. It's just the act of reading in itself is a tribute to the women that I write about. And that's such an important thing to me, that their stories are being remembered, that their experience are being noted. And because I write in this narrative nonfiction way where you're hopefully walking in step with the people that I'm writing about, I hope that almost the women are sort of brought back to life in your mind, and you get to empathize with them deeply about what they're feeling and thinking. So for me, I think what I hope people take away from the books is a memory of these incredible people. I'm always I don't know if anyone's seen that film, I think it's called Coco, from a while back, based on sort of the Mexican Day of the Dead. And part of the story is that as long as someone remembers you in the world, you know, then you're still alive in the afterlife. But the moment you're forgotten by anyone living, you die in the afterlife as well. And that, for me, it just really haunted me and sort of stayed with me. And I think as long as we're still talking about the Radium Girls, and we're still talking about Elizabeth Packard, and people are reading about them, then their memory stays alive, and they themselves, their legacy stays alive too. So for me, the act of remembering and paying tribute to their experiences and their achievements is what's really important to me.
I love that. How about you, Heather?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, there's yeah, I think it honestly, it varies per book, but in the end, I think I really like to show that there's more than one side to things. I think I like to of course sort of try to help educate the reader on an aspect that they didn't know, while I'm educating myself in the meantime, actually, through all the research and the writing. But to show that things are rarely black and white, and that the beauty is in the gray, and the interesting pieces of humanity and pieces of history that are passed on is in the gray moments. And so I very often pick characters that seem pitted against each other when I'm writing about them, when they're not really. They offer different perspectives and bring a more complete picture for an event or an idea, or a big history question, or a big emotional question. So I think that's what I would like, beyond obviously the things that these other amazing authors have said. I totally agree with them too. The memory and the legacy and honoring people that changed the world, of course. But I also like to really look at the way we as humans struggle, and how, important it is to sort of dig deeper than what appears on the surface. That's such a fiction writer's answer, isn't it? It's like
It's
not
beautiful.
a nonfiction answer.
Love that.
Beautiful.
That's beautiful. I think for me, if there was anything for any of the books, any single or them as and the books that I've written or them in total, is to offer a new lens for people to look at the past, to really shift the way they look at whatever the time period is, whether it's World War II or the Revolutionary War, whatever it is, to look at it through a fresh lens, and to see the women where they've been all along, contributing, working, making the world what it is. But they've been hiding in plain sight. I really feel like these women have been waiting for us to find them. I feel like they've been waiting for us authors to dig them out and bring them out into the light of modern day, where we can really see them and appreciate them. And then if I could really reach far, I would say I would love for people to take that lens and look at our world through that lens, to see women, to see the breadth and span of our contributions, and so that women aren't overlooked anymore, so we don't have to go about rewriting these women into history, because they're already part of it. They're already in the narrative. The reason we all four of us have to do what we do is because women have been very much left out of our accounts, our understanding of the path, with the exception of a few key people like Queen Elizabeth, right? But there are so many women, immigrant women, scientists, women at every level of our world from time immemorial, who have been making immense contributions and making it what it is today. But for the most part, we don't know them. And so if there was anything that I would love to leave behind in terms of a legacy, is just a shift in that lens.
Fantastic. I don't know if I've ever enjoyed answers to a question as much as I just enjoyed those answers. They were amazing. And we have one more question for each of you before we end tonight. And it's, it's one of our favorite questions. We need to know what you're working on next. Are there any historical figures that are asking you to write about them and tell their stories? What are you working on now?
I think Marie should answer, because I'm always so envious that Marie always knows what she's working on next.
So I have a book coming out next January called The Midford Affair. It is the story of 3 of the 6 famous Mitford sisters, famous in their time, maybe not so much in ours. They were the Mitford sisters were the aristocratic it girls of like the 1920s, 30s, not so much the 40s. Each one more beautiful, brilliant, and peculiar than the next. And the 3 that I focus upon, of them, 2 in the years leading up to World War II to become enamored and obsessed with fascism. One marries the head of the British fascism organization, and one moves to Munich, stalks, and becomes the close companion, if not mistress, of Hitler. The third sister becomes very much aware of what's happening. And she becomes very suspicious that it isn't just obsession with fascism that's happening, that they have intentions as the war arrives on their doorstep to help ease the way for Hitler. And she has the choice to her loyalty to her family or her loyalty to our country. And so it's very much a story that has a lot of modern day resonance as politics divides families. And as we are often left with choices about where our own loyalties lie. So that's up next.
Can't wait. Heather?
Yeah, so it's always one of those things where I was working on a book for a couple of years, and it's coming out finally next February, I think. They're going to decide very soon the exact date. And of course, that's done. So I'm working on something totally different. This is what authors are always doing. We're talking about one book, finishing another, and working on a new one. So the one coming out next year, I can't tell a lot about because we haven't made an official announcement, but I will say that it's a dual biographical, a male and a female. It's 1940s and 1950s, a little bit of the 60s, Hollywood. And they are true to life characters, and they are absolutely wild, and sent me on an enormous chase for information. And I'm really excited to actually share very soon, hopefully, what the topic is. So
Stay tuned. I can't wait. I can't wait. How about you, Kate?
I'm looking for my next topic at the moment. So I've found a couple of things, but I don't feel that they're quite singing to me yet. So the search continues. I possibly found something the other night, so I've ordered a couple of books to research further. So maybe that's going to be the one, but equally it might turn out to be just as much a dead end as the others that I've found recently. I won't know until I actually get the books delivered and start to read them. So yeah, I'm in that moment now where I'm looking and trying to find, and I always try and find something that still has relevance to the modern day, because as Marie said, it's all about that lens. And I also, because I write narrative nonfiction in such a personal way, I'm also very particular about what first person material is available about these historical stories that I'm finding, because I want to be able to use that first person material so as to be able to understand the thoughts and feelings of the people that I'm writing about. So maybe I found something, but I don't know yet. And in the meantime, the search continues.
Fabulous.
you'll get something great. We have no doubt.
And how about you,
Absolutely.
Catherine?
So I am exploring another untold family story, and I am working on my mother. It would be set in 1970s in DC. Watergate would be involved, and it is unclear whether it would be nonfiction or fiction. But that's what I'm working on right now. It's very early days. Like Kate, I'm exploring and feeling my research out. So
Very
I'm
cool.
excited
Wow.
for all of you. Absolutely. Well, I am afraid that is all the time we have tonight. Thank you, authors. Thank you, viewers. We hope you found this an informative and entertaining evening. If so, join us next month when we'll feature two incredible thriller authors, Carter Wilson and Julie Clark. The sign up link for next month should be in the chat. And I hope we'll see you there. And a reminder to everyone that if these books sound like something you are dying to read, and they should be, please again I know the link for Eventbrite was in the chat. Go to one of our participating indie bookstores, purchase that book from those bookstores. They all ship, and you will get a signed book plate from the author. This is my trophy room right here, and these are my trophies because they're my signed books. So book plates, signed books are my absolute treasures and my legacy to leave my kids. So start building yours. Thank you again for joining us. Authors, if you all want to hold up your books and say goodnight to our viewers. Thank you again, everybody.
Good night,
and
everyone. Lovely to see you all, other
Thank
authors,
you
and thank you for
all.
joining us.
Nice seeing you guys.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mary.
Everyone.